for myself here. I do apologize. I am out of the country and don't have extremely fast internet here, but we've got an amazing group of people online tonight. I'm just going to be watching my my audio panel here in case there's anyone that can't hear us clearly. We've got a number of different panelists, and so we're going to be testing the realms in terms of technology tonight. But it's a very, very exciting topic, and certainly one that is very pertinent at the moment in terms of what it is that people are looking to understand and where we are going in terms of South Africa. What we're looking at tonight is property rights and land distribution, what you really need to know. And we've got an amazing, esteemed group of panelists tonight that are going to discuss it. They're coming from all different realms in terms of their understanding, their beliefs. As you can probably understand, not everyone agrees with what we think or where the future is going. And we've done that on purpose to get many different views and points of view so that you have the individual capacity to make up your own mind. So without further ado, I want to welcome all the panelists who are online tonight. It's really, you know, a huge amount of honor to have Uyani, we've got Darby, we've got Pete, we've got Hilda, and we've got Neil, who are all joining us online. So I just wanted to say, you know, welcome to all of you. I will go into a little bit more of an intro about who you are, but welcome. It's so great to have so many of you online tonight. So we've got, they've obviously got themselves all muted, and so this is going to take a little bit of getting used to for everybody. But Darby, you should be able to hear us now. Hilda,
I can hear fine. I can hear fine. Good evening to everybody.
Fantastic. Neil and Pete and Hilda.
This is Pete, and hello.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Neil Peterson here.
This is Hilda.
I've got to all of you. Okay, so let's crack on. I want to, obviously tonight, with people all over the world, it's going to be easier once we actually address people one-to-one. But thank you, and again, it's wonderful to have you online, and it's also wonderful to have so many of you online tonight in terms of this groundbreaking webinar. I wanted to start off with just setting the scene from with regards to the future and what it is that's happening. And, you know, so many people sit and they say to themselves, well, what do I do about the future? How do I look into the future? How do I make decisions based on the future? Where do I actually focus my attention? And, you know, I always go back to the lessons that I learned from a gentleman by the name of Clem Sunter. Now, Clem Sunter is one of the most respected South Africans. He won an award recently, one of the top 3 most respected businessmen in South Africa. And he's actually globally respected as one of the top 5, you know, international people for scenario planning. And him and Chantal Ilbury actually wrote a book called Mind of the Fox. And in simple terms, it comes up with different scenarios, and it actually helps people look into the future, come up with different scenarios, and to make plans. We actually wrote a book which was endorsed by Clem Sunter, The Property Going Global, and it was based on his technology to help people actually invest and make decisions based on the future. And in simple terms, the way that it actually works is it has a flag system. And that flag system then allows people to look at different scenarios. And no matter what scenario happens, we need to decide what it is you're going to do. So no one actually knows with 100% surety what is going to happen tomorrow. And so what one needs to be able to do is to make a plan whether scenario A happens, whether scenario B happens, and whether scenario C happens. Just 2 seconds here. So what ultimately this allows you to do is that Clem and Chantal came up with 4 different scenarios for the global environment and the global economy. And you can see there that, you know, from this particular slide, that you've got the 4 different slides. The first one is hard times, the second one is new balls please, the third one is fork lightning, and the fourth one is ultraviolet. Now, I don't have time to go into a huge amount of detail, but what you need to do as an investor is ultimately then decide as to which one of the 4 scenarios you think is most likely, and based on that, it'll impact where you invest and what it is that you do. What's very interesting for South Africa is that they've actually got three scenarios for South Africa. So they've got the Premier League, they've got second division, and they've got failed state. Now, I talk a lot about this in chapter 4 of the book Property Going Global, and what the impacts are and what you need to know and do as an investor. So if I go into this in a little bit more detail, you can actually see here on chapter 4 of the book Property Going Global, it's on pages 54 and 55. And the way that Clem talks is that you've got the three scenarios. You've got Premier League, and he gives it a 50% chance. You've got second division, and he gives that a 25% chance. And then he's got failed state, and he gives that a 25% chance. And he says the critical flag as to whether we go into failed state is violence. But I think the most important component is that the secondary flags, and there's a number of secondary flags. The first one is nationalization, and whether the ruling African National Congress goes down the road of nationalization. The second secondary flag is the clumsy implementation of the NHI program, which is National Health Program. The third implementation is the media tribunal. The fourth one is ultimately the one that we're looking at the moment, and that is land grabs. And whether or not we're going to follow the model of what happened with Zimbabwe and ultimately with the economy. And the fifth one is whether we're going to have our own Tunisia moment. And this is the one that I find fascinating when one considers the article that's been running around at the moment by Max Dupree in terms of the money web. But really what we're focusing on tonight is this fourth component and what it is that's actually happening with regards to land. What this ultimately allows people to do is it creates a four-dimensional model. And whether we're in the Premier League, the second division, or failed state will determine where one should be investing. And ultimately, where we are, Premier, second division, or failed state, will determine the amount of money one should be investing locally versus offshore. Now, again, there's no perfect formula for this. Ultimately, it comes down to gut feel. But as Clem Sunter says, you know, the simple answer should be if you're 100% confident in the future, then you should invest 100% in South Africa. If you are 50-50, you should invest 50% locally and 50% offshore. And if you're 80% negative and 20% positive, you should invest 80% offshore, 20% locally. But that's down to each individual. And the purpose of tonight is ultimately to be deciding what one should or shouldn't be doing. The second thing that I wanted to bring up before we get into the panelists is this fantastic TED Talk, which is done by Neil Ferguson on the 6 killer apps of prosperity. So you can see the spelling there, Niall, N-I-A-L-L, Ferguson, and it's the 6 killer apps of prosperity. It's a TED Talk. It's free. Every single one of you can access it. It's been watched by over 1.3 million people. It's one of the most viewed TED Talks. And again, I would highly, highly recommend you going to watch it. And I just want to give you a very quick summary. But he talks about what's happened over the last 20,000 years on this planet, or 2,000 years, sorry, and what has happened with the wealth. And although there's been 106 billion people that have been born on this planet, 94% of them are dead, 60% of them were Asian, and most were poor. But what's very, very interesting is that $195 billion worth of wealth has been created, but the majority of it's only been created since the 1800s. And after that, the Westerners, who only own 19% of the world's population, own 66% of the world's wealth. He looks at the wealth gap, and he looks at the difference between American population to GDP versus the Chinese population, and he also looks at the UK population versus the Indian population. Now, the American population versus the Chinese population in terms of GDP was 20 times more wealthy if you were an American than if you were Chinese. Now, there was a person, Abraham Mutafikar, well, I can't pronounce that, Mutafikar, that in 1731 said, why do Christian nations, which were so weak in the past compared with Muslim nations, begin to dominate so many lands in modern times and even defeat the once victorious Ottoman armies? And he himself came to the conclusion it was because they have laws and rules invented by reason. Now, in simple terms, Niall goes into this analogy and he looks at absolutely everything. He looks at whether it was geography. He looks at whether it was custom or culture. And ultimately, he comes back to 6 things. And he says the difference between the West and the East was that the West had 6 things. The first one was competition. The second one was scientific revolution. The third one was property rights. The fourth one was modern medicine. The fifth one was a consumer society. And the sixth one was work ethic. And in simple terms, I don't have time tonight to go into all six of them, but all of you have the privilege of being able to go and watch that. But I just wanted to look at the property rights. And it actually goes as far as to say that John Locke, who was a philosopher out of England in the 1600s, spoke about the property rights. And this is when ultimately property rights came into being, where you went from a deed of indenture, where you effectively were able to lease the land from a king, to getting a land grant. And that was ultimately the difference. And when you look at the difference between Canada and the United States, and the number of landowners that actually took place there versus South America in Argentina and Mexico, and then you look at the wealth that was caused by that, and it's absolutely significant. But the last thing I wanted to say is that ultimately this reconvergence is happening. In China and the US, it went from 20 to 1 to 5 to 1 to now 2.5 to 1. And by 2016, the Chinese economy is actually going to overtake the American economy. Now, the question we've got for the future billions is there are three questions. And when you look at the global GDP or the global wealth of economies, you can actually see what is happening here and how they are actually converging together. And you can see here the American economy and you can see the Chinese economy. But there's three questions that we have to ask ourselves. The first one is that is the West deleting its own apps? You know, its work ethic has literally gone down the tubes when you consider to South Korea, when you look at education and mathematics, when you look at what's happening in the West, both in America, in England, in Australia, in Europe, when it comes to the socialism, the lack of work ethic, and the how hoodies like this want everything for free. The second question is, will Africa be able to get the sequence right? And the third question is, will China be able to continue its wealth effect without the rights to property ownership? And here's a picture of a building that was being destroyed in 2011 in Shanghai because someone went out against the government and said that they should be, stood out against the government and said that they should have the rights to property ownership. So that sets the context for what it is that we're trying to discuss tonight. And I think really the purpose of tonight is to empower you to be able to take hold of your future. But most importantly, when you're looking to take hold of your future, we want to basically be able to ease your concerns, because a lot of people will be sitting there and life in the future might seem tough. And when you look at your wagon, I'm not sure if you're the person up the front or whether you're the person pushing and you've got the square wheels. But I'm a big believer that as long as you've got the right information, which are these round wheels sitting here in this carriage, then life can be a hell of a lot easier. And so without further ado, I now wanted to welcome and introduce who the panel are. And as I said to you, we've got Vuyani, and hopefully Vuyani's joined us. I know that he was struggling to get online. I just want to check, has Vuyani managed to join us yet? Robin, can you give me an update as to where we are with Vuyani?
I've been trying to get more people on the webinar. See, I haven't got hold of him yet. So I'm just finished with him. I'm going to call him now.
Okay, I'm going to move directly on then to Dawie Ruit. Dawie is known for his extensive knowledge in the South African economy. Dawie's career in economic and political analysis spans over the last 20 years and includes 9 years as an economist for the South African Reserve Bank, as well as being the economic editor of the financial publication. Dawie, it's a huge amount of honor to welcome you online tonight. I know that you've done plenty of these presentations in the past, and it's certainly something that you're very vocal and outspoken about. You are part of the Efficient Group, but just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and your context when it comes to this land discussion.
Hello, good evening to everybody. Thank you very much for the invite. Very nice to be here. My name is Dawie Ruit. I'm the chief economist. I'm also a director of a company called the Efficient Group. The Efficient Group is a financial services company, and the Efficient Group is listed on the JSE. We started the company approximately, well, in 2002. Heike Weidhaze, our MD, and myself, we started this company. And today we have about 250 people working for the company. We have approximately 20,000 clients, and we are responsible for approximately 80 billion rand. I have always been quite intrigued and very much interested in all sort of political ideologies, and I've been particularly interested in communism, and I've been to Russia a number of times. I've been to the Patrice Lumumba University. I've studied communism, and I am not a communist today, but at least I know why I'm not a communist. Unfortunately, if you listen to South Africa's Communist Party members, they call themselves communists, but they haven't got a clue what the ideology really means. And if you see what's happening in South Africa, and you can see how things are changing in South Africa very clearly, the South African government is moving, let's call it, to the left. I've also done some research on where we come from as human beings, and if you're interested, I can show you a very nice graph going back approximately 100,000 years, and the golden thread, what's been happening to us the last 100,000 years, without a doubt, is that private property rights have become more and more important. And today, I am the most important person in this country, and everything in this country, the Constitution, the Constitutional Court, the President, the Parliament, everybody is there for one reason only, and that is to serve me. And the only rights, the only thing that limits my rights are your rights. So that, in short, is what I am and what I stand for.
Darby, thank you very much, and that's a fantastic introduction. And you know, I certainly, the reason I tried to start off with that context, both from Clem Santa and also from Niall Ferguson, is that, you know, a lot of the stuff that we debate today is not just a South African thing, but ultimately a global thing. And really one needs to look, you know, there's a fantastic book out by Jim Rogers that's one of the most successful international investors, and he says the only thing you can sure of is uncertainty, and the only thing that you can be able to use through uncertainty is to look back at long term and what's worked and hasn't worked, because history will repeat itself. And so I find it very interesting what you say and the impacts that it has in the past based on what history's done as to kind of giving us some guidance in terms of where the future is.
Well, yes, and if you allow me a little bit later, if I can, I would go through where we come from as human beings, and maybe share the graph. And without a doubt, we call ourselves civilized today, and the only reason why we can call ourselves civilized today is simply because we've evolved in terms of first individual rights. And one of the most important rights there, and in fact, I think the important rights. Most important right is private property right. And with private property rights, I really mean the very, very broad definition thereof. It's not only my right on my property, but it's my right on my life. It's my right to contract. It's my right to sell my labor. I am the most important person, like I've said, in this country, and I demand to be treated as such.
Yep, no, 100%. So without further ado, I wanted to move over to Pete. Pete LaRue is the head of news and content for sorry guys, I'm from Durban. Solidariteit, senior research in economics and head of research and development of economic policy for Solidarity Research Institute. The Solidarity Research Institute was established with the purpose to provide quality research that's in the public's interest. And Pete, it's with a huge amount of honor that we welcome you tonight as well. I found the papers that you've done absolutely fascinating. I've read your entire document that you put together through Agribusiness and the state of all private ownership, which is a 34-page document, which was the most thorough analysis that I could find. And yeah, I mean, I just wanted to really congratulate you. And before I hand over to Pete, I thought it was very interesting that on your board of Agribusiness is Steve Boyson, who ironically was the CEO of Absa Bank, and the gentleman that employed my wife when we came back from London back in 2007. So I thought it was a very interesting correlation when I was looking. But Pete, just tell us a little bit about yourself and all the research that you've done, because you seem to be one of the most people that have done the most research in this field that I've ever known.
Scott, happy to join you, and I'm happy to be in a company you consider to be good company, so that's a great introduction. Thank you very much. Scott, what we do at Solidarity is I'm at the Research Institute of Solidarity, and it's a trade union, but it's not a regular trade union. So our listeners might think, well, what's a trade union man doing defending property rights this evening? What are they doing, researching it and putting up reports and warning on some negative trends in the domain of property rights? Well, we try to be a free market union because we realize that it's not like Karl Marx said, and to latch on to what Dawie said about the communists. The world doesn't work the way communists think it works. It's not that labor is an exploitative relationship. It's a win-win thing. And so this is where this research comes from Solidarity side, is we try and look at the, if you wish, the killer apps, the important things that have to be there for society to work in a win-win relationship, in a win-win kind of way, and property rights is just one of those absolutely essential elements. We did this research for Afri-Business, which is a separate organization, the one you're showing right now to the listeners with Steve Boyson. It's a related organization, so it's an independent organization. They commissioned us to do the research, and initially the commission was much broader, so they asked us to give a total report of the state of property rights in South Africa, and it was too much to do in a brief, sort of concise way. So I think what has been sent out to the listeners, that property rights report, some of which you read and some of them may have read, that's a concise treatment of some of the major developments. What we left out are important other property right infringement legislation like black economic empowerment legislation and affirmative action legislation, which some of has merit, but it also infringes on property rights. So just to say that the report is only on a part of the property rights domain in South Africa. So that's what we do. We try and look for win-win relationships, and we do research on behalf of our members and on commission to try and look at the important things in society that has to be there for it to function.
Well, Pete, I thank you very much for joining us online tonight. With my ADHD, I much prefer to be able to get an expert like you online and be able to get to the pertinent point quickly. As I said, I did read your entire document in preparation. As people can see, it's a 36-page document. And as you say, that's only the summary behind the real content. So, it's much better just to be able to ask you directly and get straight to the point in terms of what are the key things that I need to be aware of. So thank you very much for being online. So I wanted to move over to Hilda. And Hilda Lunderstedt is a serial entrepreneur who is recognized internationally for her sales and marketing experience. She currently serves as the director of the Lunderstedt Group. Hilda has established herself as an expert in business strategy, innovation, marketing, branding of business, products and services. And Hilda, it's fantastic that you are able to join us online tonight, not only with your extensive business experience, but also with your investment experience. I wanted to get a sense, not only as a business lady, but as an investor, as to what your thoughts were, what your understanding was in terms of what was happening, and also, most importantly, once you hear the context from the other speakers as to what your thoughts were as an investor. So it's great to have you online tonight, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, everyone. I think what I did realize over the last couple of weeks is how ignorant probably most of our population is about what's happening, with the land reform. And as an entrepreneur, I usually see the opportunity in things. And I think now that I know a little bit more, I think my ignorance has made space for real concern, especially for our business people, our small business, our investors. And if the right decision isn't being made by those decision makers, what it's going to create and the impact on our country. And more important, I'm an avid campaigner for children's rights and our future generation. And they are going to bear the consequences of decisions that's being made in our generation. So I hope by everybody all creating awareness that we can hopefully make a difference, make a change, and not just be the frogs in the hot water, not seeing it coming. So thank you. It's wonderful to be on the panel.
Yeah, no, I mean, and thank you very much, Hilda, and I completely agree with you. I mean, what we're talking about now is not just the next 5 or 10 years, but I'd like to think that everyone online is a passionate South African, and it's not only for ourselves, but for our children and for future generations that we're discussing it. So I think what you're bringing up is extremely, extremely valuable.
Yeah.
So then I wanted to move over to Neil Peterson. Neil is the founder and publisher of Real Estate Investor magazine and is the authority on real estate investing in South Africa. Neil has published over 80 real estate investor magazines and co-authored a book. He is an accomplished investor and mentor. And as it turns out, and you sometimes know when you're literally at the forefront of what is happening, and I found it very funny. Neil's a good friend of mine, and we were talking about doing this webinar, and he said, oh, by the way, November edition. So literally this edition, this month, you can get it on the shelves in all the major retailers, book retailers out there. Real Estate Investor magazine is actually talking about the property rights. So it's amazing how these things and how in the universe aligns, everything is coming up. So you can see Neil's magazine here. I'm clicking through to page 16 where it's actually the major feature and ultimately property rights. So Neil, over to you. And again, fantastic to have you online. And I think it's fantastic that you are champion for South African real estate investors. What is happening? I read this article by Monique, and for those who don't know, Monique actually won the award. I can't remember if it was last year or this year for the best reporter, real estate or property reporter in South Africa. It was a SAPO award, so she comes with a lot of heavyweight experience and credit. But she's the one that's recently written this article. Neil, you there?
Can you hear me?
Okay, we got you, Neil.
You got me? Well, thank you. It's really an honor and a privilege to be on this webinar and with an esteemed audience. I'm very passionate about real estate, and and it's I'm all for the rights of investors, that they come first, and I believe that the property is the cornerstone of wealth. And everybody deserves to obviously own a property, and it's one of my hairy audacious goals that one day every single human being on this planet can own real estate, because that's the fundamental of wealth, I believe. However, this is now under siege, and I'm sure we will talk a lot about it a little bit later. About property rights, not only in South Africa but all around the world. And our reputation, in particular in South Africa, and our economic prospects are definitely being eroded. And we really need to get our government and our people to start acting more decisively. Now, we just have to look. I mean, if we think about Nelson Mandela, what he instituted, healthy debate as cornerstone of democracy and this is exactly what we're doing tonight. And so really, I'm really happy to be part of this team. I've really got some views. We like to scratch the underbelly of the industry. We don't like to, we're known as being a quirky publication. Just recently we were looking at the being industry, and now, property rights has come on our radar, and we really are up for investors. So I look forward to sharing and debating with the panel.
Perfect. Well, Neil, it's fantastic to have you online, and again, appreciate all the effort you make on behalf of real estate investors. And I did again find your article fascinating. And so for those people that want to take Pete's 36-page report and read it in Neil's 4 or 5-page report, the magazine is there. And if you just type into the chat box REIM as a real estate investor magazine, so REIM, R-E-I-M. If Neil gives me permission, I will send a digital copy to everyone who is online tonight, or anyone that watches this recording. We are fully subscribed tonight. We've actually got a problem. We've got too many people online. So to all the presenters, thank you very much. There's too many people that want to come online tonight, which is a nice problem to have. And so certainly people will be watching this on the recording. But if you are watching on the recording, just contact us and we will give you a copy. Is that okay, Neil?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, so the last one I just want to check in is, Robin, how are we doing with Bjorni?
Vianney's trying to get on. He cannot get on because it's limiting him. It's saying it's full. So I'm not sure how else to get him on. Lawrence,
Okay.
the IT, Lawrence is busy with it.
Okay, so what I need you to do, Robin, is I need you to get him to phone in on Lawrence's number. Just give him Lawrence's or yours or anyone else's. Give him Lawrence's number and his PIN code, and he can phone in and be Lawrence so that he can communicate.
Okay.
You know, while we wait for Vianney to come online, I think it's quite important that I bring up a context that I learned many, many years ago. And it was a consultant that went in for SAB and actually helped SAB become the second biggest brewer in China. And when someone said to him, well, what is it and why is South African breweries the second biggest brewer in China and why did they beat the likes of Heineken and everyone else? And the guy turned around and said, the reason being is because we're experts in chaos management. And I do think it's quite ironic that as South Africans, we always have to be able to improvise and make a plan. So I want to get right into these questions. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with Darby. I'm going to move straight on to question number 2, and then we'll come back to Vianney once we've got Vianney's online. So just to put in context, what I was going to ask Vianney is what is the government's plan at the moment with regards to land? What is the strategy that the state is actually implementing? But let's work that in context. And Darby, I'm going to start with you and say there are very few economic examples, if any, where governments have interfered with market fundamentals and it's led to economic development. Whether you look at Venezuela, Cuba, the UK, and I mean when I talk about the UK, I'm talking about the postal service or the railways or any of the other places where they tried to, nationalize government enterprises. They fell apart and they finally went back to private. Or horrifically what happened in Zimbabwe just north of our border. It's ultimately, whenever there's been government intervention, it's led to economic failure. And Darby, I wanted to ask what your thoughts were on that as an economist, and not necessarily just with the perspective of land, but generally government intervention at a holistic level.
I think there are 2 points I would like to touch on this. The first one is that, this webinar is mostly about land. But I think that's a little bit, artificial, because what we're talking about here is private property rights, not only land. Land is certainly not as important as it used to be. We produce 10 times what we used to produce on a piece of land compared to only a couple of years ago. So it is not really about land. What we're talking about here is about private property rights. And whether that is land or your balance in your bank account, it doesn't really matter. The rules are exactly the same, firstly. Secondly, where governments got involved in whether they have been successful or not. And that is something I've been grappling with for many years. Because I know there are many systems where governments have been very, very successful. And let me give you a number of examples. Like, for example, the Soviet Union was exceptionally successful in doing all sort of amazing things. Now, I know this because I've been there for many times. And I also know this because my wife, which is Russian, keep on reminding me about this. And that's something I simply couldn't understand. Why do I believe in a system of individual freedom? And I believe this system is really the ultimate system in creating wealth, while there certainly, without a doubt, is also a system that is quite successful in creating, well, let's call it being successful rather. And after a lot of thought and after a lot of study, I realized I understand the difference between these two systems. In the one system, you have individual freedom, where you allow individuals to do whatever they want to, provided they do not undermine other individuals' rights. And inevitably, what always happens is that that specific system results in more wealth creation. And there are many examples of that. However, you also do get some systems, like, for example, even North Korea, under Kim Jong-un today, has got a huge army, and they're actually quite successful in doing all sort of terrible things, like sending missiles from one continent to the other one, and maybe even developing nuclear bombs. Why are they so successful? And I realize the reason why they are so successful is because they force their people to do certain things. Now, you can get people to do certain things if you can get people to believe in an idea. Whether this idea is racial purity of the North Koreans, whether it is a Nazism, or whether it is Mother Russia. The idea is quite powerful for some time, and then eventually the idea loses its shine, and eventually the wall comes down, like what happened in Soviet Union as well. And the only way that you can keep people in a straight line, and the only way that you can keep people to keep on producing is do what the North Koreans are doing, and that is you have to implement a system of fear. So essentially the difference between a free market system, a system of freedom, and a system of private property rights is a system of freedom, and the alternative is a system of fear. And I'm afraid, looking at what's happening in South Africa, and Piet will be able to give you all the examples, he's very clued up on all the legislation, inevitably what is happening is we're getting a government that's taking more and more power to itself, that is centralizing all these things, and inevitably we will, at the current trend, eventually end up in a system of fear. Scott.
And I can't understand anyone that would want to live in a country of fear in comparison with opportunity. It's that whole scarcity mindset versus abundance. And I truly believe in the 21st century that we're moving into a phenomenal era where abundance is available to everyone. And that if we focus on scarcity, ultimately it doesn't just divide up the pie, it destroys it for everyone, whereas abundance, everyone can gain it. But it takes us over to Piet. And Piet, you guys recently had that property conference. I think it was in June or July this year. And there was overwhelming concern, when one looked at the property rights, and there's this entire article that you wrote about it here. I can focus on some of the most important parts, but I think the part that really kind of caught my attention is that there's 14 bills, policies, and court verdicts that were pointed out, which were aiming to limit, undermine, or dismiss the property rights outright. Your CEO, Cornelius Janssen van Rensburg, actually pointed out that the ANC government is planning to make good on its promises of expropriation. It talks here about land redistribution, and that it's not just land or farmland, but ultimately all property, and ultimately property rights, which Darby's alluded to. Piet, what is happening, and what should we as South Africans be aware of?
Scott, I'm just going to get something up on the screen. Can I get back to you in just in 2 minutes if you want to ask someone a question, because I want to spend some time on this, just to make sure everybody gets it. So I'm going to get it on screen. If I can be back in a minute or two on that one.
No problem. So, sorry, do you want to get this particular article on screen? So when one looks through this, I've been through this article in a huge amount of detail, and I think just some of the things that I wanted to point out that are really important here is the legislation has been formulated in such a way that legal precedent is set, which will make applicable to all property. The state first limits property rights by means of careful crafted legislation, then assumes de facto control over property when it's too late to oppose the move. All participants supported the findings of this report and believe there's no reason for, and believe there's real reason for grave concern over the property rights in South Africa. What I think is also really, really positive is that in life it's one thing to come out and publicly say that there's problems, but what's much more positive is when people actually focus on solutions. And in this report, Agribusiness actually came out with 5 things that they can do, or that we can do, to ultimately look for solutions. Peter, are you ready to run through this now? So one of the solutions that they've been looking at here is the legitimate and orderly land distribution, and rather than just looking at the farmland, it's very interesting to know that the government actually owns more than 1/3 of all land in South Africa, and it was looking at ways of providing that. And something that I found very distressing and wasn't even aware of is that the majority of RDP housing and land that has been redistributed, even farmland, has not actually been turned into ownership rights for individuals, but is still in a leasehold that is controlled by government. And so ultimately, they haven't had the wealth effect that is taking place around the rest of the world. The second thing was the government's objective objectives for redistribution must be questioned, and whether it's merely a ploy to keep the masses and to keep their attention, or whether it's actually something along the lines of the political elites, or, for self-enrichment, and ultimately what is happening there. The legal action and the legal bias for property rights, and ultimately look at legal precedent and how a legal fund needs to be challenged each time our legal property rights are being challenged. The hedging of personal assets, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail, and then political and economic pressure. But Pete, I'm sure you're probably ready by now. I'm really interested as to what your opinions are in terms of this report, and what are the major things that we need to be aware of.
Right, Scott. So I'm not going to be able to get that on screen, but nevertheless, you've gone through the appropriate actions we recommend in the end. And just as an introduction, before I run through some of these important developments within the South African legislative sphere and policy sphere, let me make two important distinctions. The one distinction I want to make is between land redistribution and land restitution, and it's part of that appropriate action. It might have, readers might see it right there. But so the first distinction is between land restitution and land redistribution. And we must remember, when we see new policies coming from government, and we see it's a land, it has something to do with how land must be allocated. We must ask ourselves: does it right or wrong the past, or does it give someone who's had his land taken from him in an unjust way, the way Davy recommended in free society it shouldn't be done? If someone had been infringed his rights to property, and we want to restitute him, we want to give him back what is his, that is land restitution. When there is land redistribution, which is where the policy is heading right now, that is a totally different sort of way. That is the infringement on current and legitimate existing property rights to land. So that is not something to support, land redistribution, while land restitution is always something to support. It's then simply a jurisprudential question of whether it can be proven and found on a balance of whatever the legal proof is that the land should be restituted. So we don't have to be against all sorts of land reform. The land restitution is good, the land redistribution is bad, because that suggests there should be something else than a market-based allocation. There should be someone central who decides who gets what and what not. So land redistribution bad, restitution good. The second distinction is between black economic empowerment and affirmative action. And many of the listeners this evening might be from overseas, and even South Africans get this confused sometimes. Black economic empowerment and affirmative action are two separate policies. Black economic empowerment has to do with the transfer of the ownership of the means of production, to use the typical Marxist or communist terms. So it's to transfer the ownership of the economy to allegedly black people. That's what the law says it should do. It normally ends up with a few politically connected people, but that's black economic empowerment. It's a transfer of ownership of assets, not only land. And as Davy said, we shouldn't be speaking about land only this evening. The second part of this distinction is an affirmative action, and that is a policy that changes the composition of employees in the workplace. So two different policies there. Right. So let's with this in mind, look at how the infringements, the 14 infringements we look at in this report. The first is the National Development Plan, and this plan has been loaded much by some people, and by others we're a little bit more critical. Myself, I'm not so optimistic about the plan. For one, it's contradictory and confusing. Sometimes if you look at the land reform part of the document, it even suggests massive redistribution of the kind we do not want, and not proper compensation even. Only 50% compensation and so on. So a very bad side of the National Development Plan, combined with some good parts, make it a dubious plan to recommend to implement. And then, well, I'm not going to run through all 14 of them, it's best read, but each of them looks at either expropriation or outright expropriation with or without compensation. It broadens the scope of expropriation, where previously it had to be, there was very specific and limited applications for expropriation. Now that's much broader in the new bills coming. Not all of these bills have since been adopted, but all of them are suggestive of the policy direction government is taking, and if they or substitutes of them with more or less the same content are adopted, it's definitely going to be negative, not only on the property you own as an investor, but on the whole economic sphere, which means even indirectly your property will not come to fruit. You will not be able to bear as much fruit as it would in a free economy. I think that for a summary, maybe Scott, if you want to zoom into something, you're welcome.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Pete. You know, I've been through this in quite a lot of details here. You know, there's a lot of. I really appreciate you giving us the breakdown in terms of, you know, redistribution, et cetera, and I kind of get that. And whether it's the green paper, whether it's the policy, but I think one of the things that is the most important one for me was this policy that's been proposed by the Minister of Land Reform, Gugeli Nkwintini, on strengthening of the rights for workers on working the land, aims to transfer 50% of the land to the workers, commensurate with their terms of service. No compensation will be paid. Again, when I read into that in a lot more detail, it's not that government won't pay; it's just the government won't pay to the landowner, the seller of the land, or the person being forced to sell the land, and then it's going to go into some sort of fund, which ultimately comes back to what you were saying in the beginning, which, from what I can understand, is that the government is looking to set up some sort of working caucus, working committee, where they, the all-knowing government, will decide who gets the land, how the land will be operated, how the land will be funded, etc. And I think one of the most worrying things from what I read and from what I hear from you and what Darby's talking about is that all these different decision
making in the spheres that cannot be run centrally. It's not only that the government Italy
reform is a 4-tier system. So I'm not sure whether we're talking about the tenure system or land redistribution or land restitution or which program are we on? Where are we now?
Beyani, if I could, let me reverse back a little bit. As they say in Africa, we've got to be able to deal with challenges, and obviously people being able to get online tonight. So I just want to introduce you properly for everyone. And you effectively are the Deputy Director of Communications of Rural Development and Land Reform. Has extensive experience throughout South Africa and communicates the government protocol, media statements, and organizes media events for the Department of Land Reform. And from what I saw actually online when I was just researching things, is that you're based in the Western Cape. So I can see down in Cape Town. But I think the really where we were looking at, Buyani, from our perspective, was that we've got a number of different people online tonight, and we were kind of looking at the land reform and the different things that are taking place in context of where we're at. But the question that I would like to ask you just to get started, because I think it's probably the most important question to set the context of where we are tonight, is what is the government's plan at the moment with regards to land, the long-term strategy, how they're looking to implement it, and most importantly, 10, 20, 50 years from now, you know, what is the future for our children, everyone's children? It doesn't matter where they come from, black, white, Indian, colored is irrelevant. We're all passionate South Africans. What is the future looking, 50 years from now, and how does the government look to sustainably introduce that and to, charter a good, solid economic course going forward?
Oh, okay. No, thank you for the opportunity. I think government has made a four-year strategic plan, which deals with different types of land reform programs in the department. One is the one that we're talking about, that is the land tenure system. The land tenure system is the one that deals with state and the public land leasehold, where we're looking at the lease agreement that we're entering with the emerging farmer, whereby we're also looking at the farmer support system to the emerging farmer. And also, we're also looking at the policy, that deals with the foreign ownership, foreigner owning land in South Africa. We have to draw the line in terms of how much a foreigner can own in South Africa, and also how much a South African can own land, because the demand for land, there are a lot of landless people that are owning land. And then we are also looking at the program of communal land. There's a lot of communal land that is lying around the rural area of South Africa.
And tell me, I mean, look, in terms of one of the things that I know certainly from my own experience is that when I lived in London and was promoting South Africa and helping both expats invest back in South Africa, is that one of the challenges people have is that when there's uncertainty around the law, so let me just take foreign ownership as an example, is that the people have been talking about it for 10, 15 years. Okay, now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. I mean, there's only 12 countries on this entire planet that have no restrictions for foreign ownership, which South Africa is one of them. Countries like Australia have plenty of restrictions for foreign ownership. I'm currently sitting in Indonesia that has restrictions, and plenty of other countries. So there's no problem, but it's when there's uncertainty that it actually causes even bigger harm. What is the plan? You mentioned a 4-year plan, but what is the plan to kind of get that certainty, but also to get public participation so that we're not undermining the rights of current property owners and the Constitution?
Okay, Scott, we lost you there for like 10 seconds, so if you want to get the last of your question.
Okay, all I was saying is that what is the government's plan to provide both clarity? I know that he mentioned a 4-year plan, but to provide both clarity, but also to protect the rights of current property owners, so someone like myself or anyone else that currently owns property, and ultimately the Constitution, because it's one thing to plan for the future, but you also need to protect rights that people already have.
Yes, as South Africa is marking the 20 years of democracy, we have looked at the laws and also the policies that deal with the one that you have mentioned in terms of protecting the people that are owning land, either South Africans or foreigners. People that are owning land in South Africa, they should be protected. So those laws, as South Africa, we have looked at those laws. So whereby we're saying that, for instance, 2 years back, we've commissioned a committee, a company that was looking at the state land ownership, state land audits, whereby we wanted to check in terms of how much land do we own, even as South Africa and also Africa, which government institution is owning land. So out of that report, we know now who owns land where in South Africa, either at the local government or also at the national government and also the provincial government, and also by the foreign that own land. So in terms of the policy with the ownership of land in South Africa, the one that the minister said that let us look at it and let us look at that, strengthen that policy. So that we must make sure that the land is amount is shared equally by the South Africans and also by the foreigners. And then the second part that we're also looking at is to look at because now land is no longer land. The land reform program is no longer dealing with the land only. It's also dealing with the rural development. Rural development is also linked with the national development plan. The national development plan. How much hectares that the South African land reform program should contribute to the national development plan. So there's a plan that is there.
Tell me, Vuyani, have you and the likes of AfriBusiness, we've got Pete online tonight. We've also got Dawie. How much you guys engaged? How much engagement has there been? I mean, AfriBusiness has done a lot of work, put together a full report on the property right and their concerns with some of the proposals and also offered solutions. How much engagement has there been with the private sector in terms of the thought process going forward?
Yes, there has been a lot of engagement with the private sector. Private sector mostly, I will be specific with the representative of the farm owners. Mostly, if you look at our department deals mostly with agricultural land is dealing with farmers. So the department has been dealing with the representative of the farmers. That is the agricultural union. The minister is meeting the agricultural union mostly twice or 3 times a year. He attends the congresses whereby he will policy. In most cases, in all the congress or the conference, the department or the workshop that we're having, where we're looking at, even when we amend the act, even recently as early as in September this year, where the policy conference that was looking at the land tenure system. So the agricultural unions representing the farmers, the farm owners, they were there. Somewhere, somehow, they agreed with us, somewhere, somehow, they did not agree with us. Then we said, let's take the debate further. So there is an engagement with the private owners.
Okay. And if I mind asking Dawie or Pete, what is your kind of feeling been in terms of the engagement from government? I mean, obviously, Pete specifically, you've done a huge amount of research. You've put this entire document together. Dawie, you've been involved from an economic perspective. What is kind of your feelings in terms of the engagement and whether there's consultation taking place or whether you feel it's one-sided or are we going to reach some sort of consensus here?
Dawie, you go ahead.
Okay, is it going to be me? Okay, Scott, I think the main issue... Yep. Can I go for it?
Yeah, go for it, Dawie, yeah.
All right. I think the main issue is not whether the private sector and government are talking to each other. I think there's quite a lot of exchange of ideas. It's ideologically totally confused. Don't know what they are, and we see it in all sorts of things. Like, for example, this 50% idea about agricultural land that was under the morning it was still on the table, the afternoon is one theology. It's a totally different matter talking to somebody that calls himself a communist, for example, but that person doesn't understand his own ideology. And that is the main issue as far as I'm concerned today in South Africa.
If I can,
obviously. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm all with more or less with Ondai with this one. I can just add that putting together a report on these 14 developments, policies, acts, policy proposals, green papers, white papers, and so on, was quite a bit of a job. And the reason it's a bit of a job, and is I'm sure that there's consultation, as Vuyani says, but we must remember how, and this is not unique to the South African government. We don't have to do South African government bashing only. I mean, governments typically do this. To consult is one thing. You put out a paper, you publish it in a few newspapers, but if you do this 100 times over, or 20, 30, 40 times a year, and you announce it one conference, like Harvey said, one morning it's on the table, the afternoon it's off, and if you have so if you have lots of developments that the private sector have to come and comment on and have to engage on, they simply do not have the capacity because they're trying to make the bottom line in their business. And some of these legislative developments, and I'm thinking here specifically of for example, the Black Economic Empowerment Act, that we've seen a number of iterations over the last couple of years, not only in the Act, but also in the policy papers that go with the Act. So that's the ones Minister Rob Davies of Trade and Industry, he can publish regulations on in terms of an Act. Those go to hundreds of pages, and to scrutinize them for all the possible iterations of what they might mean, and not even speaking now about the spelling errors and the reference errors within the documents is very difficult. So I'm sure that the door of government is open for consultation, but that does not mean that there is actual buy-in from the private sector, and specifically not from small businesses side. So only big business would possibly have the capacity to engage on these sort of things.
So guys, listen, from everyone's perspective, and Hilda and Neil, I do apologize. We went a little bit off track with the questioning, with getting into detail. So I want to get back into the sequence now. But just in terms of there are 14 different elements here. But let's get into one that is fairly emotive and one that certainly I can understand, and that's number 4 that's on the screen, where the policy proposed by the Minister of Land Reform, Gugeli Nkwalathini, strengthening of rights of workers working the land, aims to transfer 50% of the land to workers, commiserate them with a term of service, no compensation will be paid to the owner. Again, I repeat what I said earlier, where the government tends to take the money they would have paid for the 50% and put it into a fund, where they will ultimately run the fund. From your perspective, Vuyani, what is the understanding here of this specifically? My concern is from simple economics, and again, reading this report, is that the agricultural sector at the moment is worth about 101 billion rand. It's something like 90 billion is already indebted. It's 155 billion, and 89 billion is actually debts already. And the farming community uses the collateral to finance. How do we see that working? Because I just, as a businessman, that doesn't make sense to me.
Hello.
Yep. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yep, Vuyani, we got you loud and clear.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure about your question, but I think your question is talking about the 50%, the 50-50%.
Yeah, so my question's 100%. It's about in the last couple of months, there's been this talk of, taking 50% of the land from current agricultural farmers and the impact that it would have. And obviously, there's a number of organizations that have come out, including Grain SA, Agri SA, and even the African Farmers Association of South Africa, all of whom have come out and categorically said they can't see how it works. Where do we stand with this policy per se, and what are your thoughts on it, and where do you see us going with regards to it? Because the numbers just don't make sense to me. based on what is being proposed?
Oh no, I'm not authorized to comment on the policy further because the policy is being handled by the minister. But what I can say, what the minister has said is that initially we said to the farmer, when I say farmers, I'm talking about the farmers that are represented by the agricultural union. We said to them that because you remember, there's another thing that I don't want to comment about it because it's a political issue. Because you remember the agricultural, you remember the land reform policy that South Africa is implementing. It comes, whether we like it or not, it comes from the ruling party. And from the ruling party, it starts from the qualified conference of the survey, whereby it says that let us take up the land reform program. One of the things that we said, let's go to the basics in terms of the Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter has said that the people who want the land, they should have a share on the land. But the minister made it clear to the farmer that he didn't want to do this thing in a political way. He wanted the farmers to come up with a plan, that is the agricultural farmer, that is the farmer by themselves. They need a plan in terms of how we can share the land with the people that have worked the land. Because the issue here is about people that have worked in the land for a period of more than 10 years or a period of more than, some of them have worked in the land for more than 30 years. But I know the criticism from different stakeholders has been about that these people have been working on the land, have not been managing the land, they don't know how to make the land work. But the issue here is, as a department, this is our wish as well, also as our goal, that let us also produce farmers from this program. Let us challenge even the current farmer to serve as mentors of the farm workers. The farm workers, we are not saying these farm workers are going to be commercial farmers between a period of 5 years. It will take them 15 years after getting a share of the land. So, but in terms of goal, I can't go further with it because it's a very political issue, and it was raised by the minister, with the agricultural sector. And the agricultural sector has been given time up until next year, at the end of March, so that the minister can implement the policy. And also, as things stand, we're waiting for the agricultural sector to come to us as a department, also to the minister, to say that this is how they work with the department.
Okay, and I mean, Hilda, as a successful business lady in South Africa and as a mother of 2 children, you know, you've obviously looked at a lot of the documentation. You went to a recent presentation. You've even heard what we've been talking about tonight. What are your thoughts? What is pertinent to you? What do you think people should be aware of based on what you're hearing, what you've read, and what you've heard tonight?
Well, firstly, what I think in the recent seminar was held by the National Planning Commission, who had some recommendations also, but I believe the government and trade unions wasn't really keen or open to listen to their recommendations. But I believe if this is done responsibly, you know, if we need to create jobs in this country, if it's done responsibly, we could potentially create 1 million jobs, but then the approach should be focusing on the people first, educating the people on how to manage the land and how to handle the land accordingly. And you know, again, the other thing is how long will it take? How long does government take to transfer land? You know, land worth probably about 30 billion if we're looking at 20% of farmland. You know, how drastically are they going to make this change in the country? Is it going to be like 2 billion per year, which is going to take us another 15 years of probably negativity and instability in the country? If we have that, it's going to, I believe, and maybe the economists and Barbie, you can also comment on this. I believe it will have a very bad business confidence in our country. We won't attract investments, exchange rate, all of those things, which will make business and small entrepreneurs, that's livelihood comes from running their own businesses. It could potentially be impossible to run businesses. And again, with that come the impact on families and on the whole. So I'm not sure if they're going to achieve what they want to achieve by the way they want to achieve it. I don't know if any of the other panelists can back me up or can continue on that, on what I'm saying.
That I have, you know, even to throw a challenge out there. But when one looks at China, whether you agree with China's policies or not, and I mean they've got a one-party state and everything else, and I mean you could argue that there's not a lot of democracy there, but at least they're pretty clear on what they're going to do. The implementation is pretty specific, and the results have been amazing. You know, when you look at Singapore, I just spent a week in Singapore, and you know, it was not far off a benign dictatorship for 40 years, but yet it's been the most successfully run economy in 40 years. But the difference was it had clear leadership, and most importantly, leadership that felt the best interests of the people for self-interest. But I wanted to ask you, Neil. I mean, you've obviously done a huge amount of research here on behalf of real estate investors around South Africa. You know, what are your thoughts based on both the articles that you guys have written in the magazine and what you've heard tonight that are pertinent? Because there's the challenge we have tonight is that this topic is so large, and I'm trying to get us specifics so people have takeaways that they can think about. Neil, you are muted just in case you're talking away there.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great stuff. Okay, so I think investors out there, Scott, I think they're looking for wisdom, you know, and you know, they're trying to find the answers. You know, it's a really tough business environment out there. It's a tough economy, and all the time we're getting presented with more and more challenges along the way. You know, I was just looking at business rescue stats and the number of companies that have gone into business rescue and why they've gone into business rescue. And a big reason is that they, you know, it's just because there's just such a difficult environment. But one of the top reasons why the companies are struggling is just regulatory issues there from a business perspective, and themselves to avoid litigation. But from a property rights perspective, we just have to see, you know, that it's a web of legislation which is going out there for the property rights. You know, there's the National Development Plan, there's the Green Paper on land reform, there's the Expropriation Bill, there's the Promotion and Protection of Investment Bill, the Infrastructure Development Bill, the Spatial Planning and Management of Land Use Act. You know, and it's just, you know, it's just the complexity of acts, of legislation, and it's really just to, you know, we wonder whether it's just to hide behind a number of other things out there. And I think for the average investor to even, you know, the more sort of seasoned investor is just really to cut through that and just to get to understand why is that happening, and really to make alternative decisions for yourself, because, you know, at the end of the day, property is the cornerstone of your wealth, and you need to protect that. And if it means that you've got to move money offshore, you've got to move it, you know, out of South Africa into another country because of this property rights, it's affecting it, then so be it. But but in the end, if it's not determined by politicians alone, but it must be determined, as was mentioned, by ordinary citizens, which Dari brought up just now. And so, you know, we need to be constantly challenging this from an investor perspective. So, you know, without going into all the detail of all the different, because there's quite a complex subject, and I think we could be all nice if we had to go into all the different acts. But essentially, you know, we need to protect the rights, you know, and the single right of people out there, and that is the ability to buy real estate, and to give them that ability to invest. We look in countries like Mozambique. You invest in real estate, you don't actually own the land. And people question, well, is it a good investment or is it not a good investment? And now we're going to start questioning in South Africa, are we going to be going the same way here too? So there's a lot of questions. So there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot more sort of red flags, as we said earlier on, which is coming up for investors, which is going to scare people off. And Darby used that fear factor. So I think investors need to find that wisdom.
Vianney, I mean, Neil, I agree with you. And Vianney, I wanted to ask you a direct question. I spent been on a trip for about 3.5 weeks overseas, and I've just been in Australia. And it amazes me in Australia, private investors, gentleman, that's invested 40 years of his life. So literally, he started in his early 30s, and he's now in his 70s. He's invested 40 years of his entire life in a private development. He's built an entire master community outside Brisbane called Springfield, so there's now world-renowned as a master plan community. But the only way that he could do that was have confidence in the government, in the economy, in the planning, the fact that the city would move in a direction, that they would have service. But most importantly, confidence in the future and in terms of the big picture. I don't get the sense that people in South Africa have that confidence in the big picture. And my question to you, Vianney, is how quickly is government going to be able to give us clarity so that private investors, private companies can make those type of investments, those long-term investments that they do in the likes of Australia?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you clearly.
Oh, okay. I think maybe there was, you see, on the issue of private investors wanting to invest in South Africa. As a country, we can guarantee that we don't want to tamper with those arrangements, because investments they bring employment, they bring a lot of good things in the country. So there is no way that South Africa would change the policy on the foreigners not to own land in South Africa. All what we're saying, but I think also the debate is not, you see, mostly in the rural development land reform program. The program is looking at the agricultural land, and if you look at the agricultural land is away from the urban areas, urban arrangements. It's where in the farms, and also, so most of the investment that is happening, that is where investors do participate. It's not on farms. It is in the urban areas. It is in the golf courses. You name them, but not in agricultural land. So the policy amendments of government, they are looking at the agricultural land, and agricultural land is not on. It's not where the interest of foreign investors are. The investors, they invest in land where they can make some profit, they can make contribution to the employment in the country. So there should not be a worry about the amendment of the policy on the private property. Private property is not on the agricultural land mostly. Because South Africa government, our mandate as government is to deal with the farming sector, not the issue of the private property, whereby people buy land to do property development. Property development is managed and legislated elsewhere in government. And mostly it's legislated at a local government.
Well, Vianney, if I ask Darby as an economist, and I know that we've got a conscious of time here, but Darby, if I can ask you for a final comment here. One of the things that I've experienced, and half of my family is from Zimbabwe, and unfortunately, even though technically in Zimbabwe there was only political changes to agricultural land, it obviously had a much wider effect on stability, on the economy, on property rights, whether it was your house in Harare or whether it was a farm in the agricultural area. From an economic perspective, Darby, why is it so important that once you start changing any of the pillars, it seems to topple the entire house?
Yes, Scott, well, first of all, I must say that I disagree with Vianney, but he says that they're not going to change anything. They have been changing a lot of things all along. I can give you many, many examples. Piet can probably give you more examples. Like, for example, if you're a foreigner, you're not allowed to owe more than 50% of a local security company. If you discover oil in South Africa, 20% of that oil or gas or whatever will immediately vest in the state, and they have the right to take over the rest of the 80% as well. So that is simply untrue to say that nothing has been changing and that the state is not planning to take our stuff. They have been doing that all along. And another comment that I think is important to make is that the President said in the State of the Nation address earlier this year, he did say that he's going to create 1 million new jobs in agriculture. That is not going to happen, because agriculture is not an industry where you're employing more and more people. It is an industry where you employ more and more capital. And agriculture worldwide is getting bigger, businesses are getting bigger, and farms are not getting smaller. And that's an example of a government that is completely confused. But coming back to your question, the real question that you're asking here is that will I invest if I'm uncertain about whether my investment will be protected or not? And the short answer to that is I will be very reluctant to invest and put money somewhere if I'm not sure that my investment will be protected. And actually, I'm quite positive about South Africa, despite all these attacks from the politicians on private property rights. And the reason why I'm quite positive about South Africa is because of our institutions like the Public Protector, or like the independence of the press, or the independence of the judiciary. Those sort of things are pretty well entrenched, and those sort of institutions are the institutions that are going to protect us from the tyranny of the state. Because without a doubt, we've got this onslaught on private property rights in South Africa, and without a doubt, it is undermining the environment, it is undermining the confidence that investors have in this country called South Africa.
Davi, I think we just lost you there.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah. So the last thing I heard was you said you were just undermining. It's undermining.
What is happening is that we are undermining the confidence of investors in South Africa. The reality is, whether these politicians like this or not, the wealth creators in the world is the private sector. The states, governments are at best wealth redistributors, and at worst they are wealth destroyers. Now I can prove to you that the government in South Africa is a wealth destroyer, and if it hasn't been for the fact that we have private sector wealth creators, South Africa would have been significantly worse off than what we are at the moment. And if you keep on undermining the trust that private investors and private business people have in South Africa, we simply will not keep on producing wealth. Now, it doesn't matter whether you believe in some sort of weird ideology called communism or not. The reality is that you need somebody to produce stuff, and the guys that produce the stuff are the guys called the private sector.
Can I ask a question?
Can I come in?
Yep, sorry.
Can I come in? Okay. Because I don't think it's fair from the previous speaker, I'm not sure what his name is, Davi, to say that government is a wealth destroyer. I mean, that is completely unfair, and I think I would have to challenge him to say to take up these issues with the minister, especially with the issue of the private property owners, because I think that's where the confusion is also even on this debate, because mostly the department engages with agricultural owners, not the private sector. But there are discussions that happen with the private owners. But at the level of where we are moving as a government, I don't think it is enough, because mostly we're dealing with the farmland. But it is completely unfair to say that government is a wealth destroyer. I think I would challenge the speaker to say that he can take up these issues with the minister. Our minister is a minister that is engaging with all sectors of the agricultural sector. I would say agriculture, because we deal with agricultural land, and also his door is open for these issues, because to me, I'm surprised if you say that the government is the wealth destroyer. So I don't think that is a fair statement.
Can I reply to that?
I think for Yanni and Davi, I'll hand over to you now. For Yanni, I don't think one thing that's important here is that it's the context of not just in South Africa, but per se across the world. You know, certain governments have been increasingly and very surprisingly effective at creating wealth for all within the country, and others have destroyed a lot of what was in place. And there's multiple examples around the world. So, and I think really the challenge for government is to obviously be the precedent. But Davi, from your perspective?
Yes, okay. There's an organization in South Africa called the South African Reserve Bank. They publish a publication called the Quarterly Bulletin of the South African Reserve Bank. Go and have a look at the Quarterly Bulletin of the South African Reserve Bank and see who's doing the savings. Now, I can give you all the numbers. There are three potential savers: the households, the companies in South Africa. The third potential saver is government. Now, if I produce 100 and I consume 90 of something, then 10 is saved. That is added to the capital in your country. If, however, I produce 100 but I consume 110, then I am a dis-saver. I consume more than what I produce. And that is exactly what government does. Government borrows long-term money and spends on short-term current expenditure. The amount of money we're talking about annually is 100 billion rand. Government is an active destroyer of capital in South Africa. Go and have a look at the South African Quarterly Bulletin.
No, we'll do. Yeah, and I will also challenge you to engage our minister.
Sure, anytime. With pleasure.
Tommy, you did mention right in the beginning up front that you had a graph that you wanted to share. And before you leave, I'm intrigued to see what this graph is. Can I share my screen with you and then actually see what it was that you wanted to share? Is it relevant?
Yes.
Or have we
yes, I would like to share that with you. I've got it open here in front of me, but if you can just allow me to work on my own screen because you've hijacked my screen. Oh, there it is.
I've given you the screen there.
Okay, there it is. I don't know. Can you show my screen? There it is. Can you see this?
Hang on, it'll take a little while. It's coming up now. Okay. Can anyone else see the screen? It's not showing on my side here. Have you clicked show my screen?
I'm seeing it.
Yes, I have. Okay.
It just popped up.
Yes, we can set the evolution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just go quickly through this. All decisions and all developments and everything that has to do with human beings has to do with the economy. Economics is only about one thing, and it's about people. We are the economy. And if you analyze where we come from the last 100,000 years or even longer, you will see there's one golden thread going through all of this, and that is called private property rights. 100,000 years ago, in a cave called Blombos in the Southern Cape, we started to think in abstract terms for the first time. There's evidence of that. But only about 15,000 years ago, we domesticated animals for the first time. And that is when private property rights became important for the first time. About 10,000 years ago, we domesticated plants, especially grain, and all of a sudden land became important. And private property rights were extended to include land as well. And in the past 10,000 years, we created institutions like laws, like politicians, like constitutions, like courts. And the idea of all these institutions is only to protect private property rights. There was a bit of a deviation happening about 2,000 years ago with the name of a guy with the name of Plato, that thought that property rights should be communally owned, and about 160 years ago, a guy with the name Karl Marx wrote a book called Das Kapital, suggesting that private property rights is not the way to go about, but we need to have collective property rights. But if you look at the evolution of humankind the past 100,000 years, there's one thing only that really matters, and that's the evolution and the protection of private property rights. And those societies that protected private property rights and the broad definition thereof are those societies that got wealthy, and they are the societies with low levels of unemployment and high levels of wealth. If we need to achieve real civilization, we need to protect private property rights.
I must admit, I really enjoy your graph here. It's very simple for a visually oriented person like me, but I'm fascinated by the very last part of your graph there that says globalization, e-commerce, and social media. Let's say that we protect the property rights, you know, but where are you saying that we're going? I mean, in a perfect world, Dawie, if I was to ask you your final comment, you know, where is South Africa 10 years from now? What is the best case scenario for South Africa? Compromise between everything we've discussed, and where do we need to go?
Well, you know, the Democratic Alliance, the DA, is going to tell you that they are the official opposition in South Africa. They are not. The official opposition in South Africa are the financial markets, is the economy, is the market. That is the official opposition. And the market will always rule supreme. You can suppress the market in the short term, but eventually the market will always win the fight. Where are we going to be in 10 years' time? I think in 10 years' time, even our politicians will see the light. They will realize that private individual rights are the important thing. In 10 years' time, we may have something called a virtual currency. And in 10 years' time, politicians will lose even more power. And in 10 years' time, I called my name Dawie Rood. You guys all around this table tonight will have more power, because that is where power should be, in the hands of the individual, and certainly not in the hands of politicians. What's been happening in the past 100,000 years is that I've become more and more important, and I will continue to become more important over the next 10, 20, and 30 years as well. And the politicians will eventually realize that they work for one person only, and he is called, that guy that they work for is called Dawie Rood, and the other people around this table. I am the most important person in this country, and I demand to be treated as such.
Yeah, no, I think I love what you say in terms of the power of governments. I do think with social media, I mean, you only have to look at what happened with the Arab Spring on the northern side of our continent, what happens and the way people can communicate and what can happen. You know, Dawie, I do understand that you need to leave, and I do realize that this debate has gone on for a long time already. So, you know, I will be bringing the session to an end for everybody. But I really want to thank you for your time, and this graph that you've got here is fascinating. I love ultimately the basis behind it. If I look at it, and in simple terms, I can see is that it ultimately comes down to freedom versus fear. And I think that every single person, every single 50 million South Africans need to be empowered with freedom and not fear, because ultimately it determines whether we go forward or whether we go backwards.
Thank you very much for the invite.
Cool. Thank you, Dawie. Pete, from your perspective, in conclusion, you know, as I said, you've done a huge amount of work yourself, and let me just get myself back to presenting here. What are your kind of closing thoughts or comments as to what we as South Africans should be aware of, and how we can engage more, and obviously take this very informative document that you've put together, I've got up on the screen here, and engage with government, just like Yanni is requesting us to, whether it's at private residential rights or whether it's at farm rights. What are your thoughts? What are your closing comments that we need to be aware of and ultimately do here?
Yeah, I think just to sum it all up, our report says things are heading the wrong way, and that statement we make by providing some evidence in those 14 things we point to, in what we discussed this evening. That evidence is corroborated when you look at the international indices of economic freedom, and you see that South Africa is dropping in them. And what's most important in those indices, like the Economic Freedom of the World Index by the Fraser Institute in Canada, that's the most well-known one, or the Heritage Foundation, the indices tell us is if we head in the wrong direction, that's even worse than the absolute level you're on. So the point is, South Africa is heading in the wrong direction in a policy environment. But it's not all bad. It's not all doom. And that's why we have those 5 recommendations at the end. And it's something that has to be built into the risk premium when you make investment decisions in South Africa. But it's not like South Africa isn't an investment destination. But we did this to make it aware and to hopefully change the direction and the momentum on this, because the world doesn't just happen to one. One can also influence it. And one can influence it by joining business lobby organizations, by joining organizations like AfriBusiness or the Free Market Foundation and so on, and try and engage, as Vuyani invited us, with the minister, but also not just engagement. Engagement works in the end only if you wield real influence, and that comes with, on the investment side, saying I'll invest or not, and making that explicit so that there's an actual response to a request that policy be more favorable. So I think that sums it up, Scott. I don't know if you want to take on again.
No, fantastic. I mean, I think, look, Pete, certainly from your perspective, I really, really appreciate all the hard work you guys have done. And, you know, when I look through this very informative report, I know that, Neil, you know, you used a lot of it to get, you know, a huge amount of understanding. I think that AfriBusiness and you specifically, Pete, have really kind of delved into all the different drafts and amendments, and as you said, all the huge amount of detail that has come from government. And so I do really appreciate it, and I think it gives us all insight. And certainly information is power, and clarity is the most important thing we all require. So I really appreciate what you've done, and again, thank you tonight for giving us a huge amount of perspective, and hopefully you will allow us to engage further, because I think one thing that certainly come out for me tonight is that there's a huge amount of questions that everyone's asking, and you know, there's you know, I find it challenging in an hour and a half to take something that is so important and such an underlying foundation to the future of our country, and to try and wrap it up in an hour and a half seems virtually impossible. We could debate it for 6 days, you know. But I do want to thank you for your time and the perspective you brought tonight. Vuyani, from your perspective, thank you very much for being on tonight. I think obviously there's different angles and different challenges. I just want to check in. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. I think as a closing statement from our side, I think as government, we would like to invite the private sector to engage us on these issues, because some of these things they are concerns, because we don't want to be a contributing government to the government that is destroying the wealth of the country, because government is aiming to develop all of us, either poor or rich, or even the job creators, and also those who are looking for the jobs. And also our message is that I see there was a question in terms of where do you see yourself in 10 years' time. But I think as government, in the 10 years' time, in the next 10 years, we'd like to see whereby all of us, private sector, even communities that are engaging on the farming sector, mostly the emerging farmers, whereby those who have already successful farmers, they take the emerging farmers in hand so that they can assist them in developing them and also assisting them, most importantly, to serve as their mentors. And also, I would also like to invite the private sector to come and join us when we implement, or in fact, when we develop these policies, because politicians, they raise policies. It's up to the conferences, congresses that are eligible, or that are able to contribute in the finalization of those policies. Because policies, they are pronounced by politicians, but it's up to the conferences and congresses of government with private sector to make sure that their concerns are raised on those policies. But at the end of the day, we can agree or disagree in some of these issues. Some of these issues are political, and some of these issues They are just social issues, economic issues, whereby whether we like it or not, somehow we differ in terms of how we approach some economic issues, agricultural issues, and also political issues. But at the end of the day, we have to encourage engagement.
No, well, thank you very much, Vuyani, and all I would request from your perspective is if you can, let me know as to what the right forum is to engage, because I think that engagement is vital, and certainly with what Davy said in terms of social media, the individual has a voice now. It doesn't matter whether they're stuck in the middle of the Kalahari or or no matter where they are on this planet, everyone has a voice now through social media, and I think it's important just for everyone to have clarity as to how we can engage.
Yes, we'll make those arrangements available.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate it, and thank you very much. From Hilda, from your perspective, obviously you've brought a lot of insight tonight, but equally so, there's been a lot of debate. What would you say is kind of your takeaway, and what are you thinking to do, not only for yourself, but for the rest of the listeners tonight? What do you think is the pertinent, important factors that people need to take into account?
Scott, there's a couple of things. I think we need the general population and general public needs to become more aware, and for the people that's on this call is to help create the awareness of what is really going on, because I don't think there is enough awareness. It's a complicated, big subject, but I don't think that there potentially isn't enough awareness around the people that will be affected by this. I wish for clarity, and I hope we can get clarity pretty soon so that we can work on a stabilized economy and a stabilized country. And I want to say, aiming to what Davy is saying about the private individual rights, because it's only then that businesses can thrive. And when businesses thrive, societies thrive. And when our societies are thriving and healthy, we will attract investments from all over, be it foreign or people that's got more confidence of starting businesses, investing in property, in whatever they want to invest in. So I think the quicker we can get through the motions and can get clear on what exactly is going to happen, then we can move on to improve our economy and grow our economy.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think that's one of the things that's interesting you bring that up, Hilda, because I think one of the things that concerns me, even out of tonight's conversation, is that it's almost like with the Arab and the Israeli crisis, we all know that they need to find peace, but no one seems to be able to understand how to do it. My concern is that we have a similar dichotomy here where we all understand it has to be solved, but none of us seem to have clarity. I certainly have no clarity as to how it's going to be solved in the future. And I really took away something important that you said, was that if we take 30 billion and it's going to take 2 billion a year and it's going to take 15 years, what is going to be left after 15 years from an economic perspective? Because economic cycles now are becoming faster and faster and faster, and private capital doesn't really care. It's no longer passionate and stuck to one country. Private capital can and will go anywhere in the world to be able to get safety and ultimately wealth preservation and a return. And it's certainly something we as South Africans need to take into account, because who knows where the world will be in 15 years, and we might be well left behind by then.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Thanks for inviting me on the panel.
No, thank you very much, Hilda. Your perspectives have been fantastic. Neil, from your perspective, obviously you've heard a huge amount tonight, and I think clearly we need to do a further review in another edition from your magazine based on all the questions that are coming through tonight. But what are your major takeaways for real estate investors and the people you're passionate about serving through quality information? And if nothing else, for me, Vuyani set a challenge here that we need to be communicating. But how do you see this working going forward?
Well, I think the awareness issue was brought up, but I think then after being aware of something, you've got to dig a little bit deeper, and I think you also have to start getting involved. Now, we heard Vuyani say he gave an invitation to us to engage with him, and I see the way forward because of the power of the individual and because of the power of social media going forward, is that we must take them up on that invitation. and we must proactively protect our rights and proactively form, whether it's a group or some kind of initiative where we stand together. Because if we're going to go out there as individuals, we're probably not going to win. And I think David put some really sort of salient points down in terms of wealth creators, wealth destroyers, and obviously I think it will make the hedgehog government type people look up and say, well, we're not like that, and that's what Vianney said. So, but our perception, it is like that. We feel like slaves sometimes, and we know that slavery was abolished a long time ago. But we're now in the age of intelligence. We got access to information. We've got to use that information proactively forward. So I think it's taking, and part of our job as real estate investors is really scratching the underbelly. We want to take it further. So there will be a next series on this, to say, well, what actually happened from this discussion. But I also think that there should be some kind of initiative formed, and whether it starts from this panel or wherever. But I think we just cannot sit back and we can just see the economic competitiveness of South Africa just sort of wane off. I mean, this year in particular, manufacturing and mining has almost collapsed, and we just don't want to see the same thing happen. To property and property rights, because of legislation in this country to our private property rights, that it starts affecting our wealth as well. So yes, we've got to be proactive. I think let's take up Vianney on his invitation. Let's engage. Let's collaborate with governments, because that's going to be one of the key points going forward. The key initiatives is to collaborate with governments, and not only in South Africa. All governments all around the world are very tax hungry at the moment. And all individuals in the country are all under financial pressure, to pay more tax and to get less of return. So I think, the more we engage, the sort of better results we can get. So, I think if that's the one big thing, one big take-up, that's the one I would say, let's start engaging closer, forming a group forum, and starting to engage and collaborate with government.
No, Neil, I take you up on that challenge, and something that I've been away for a week on a workshop with Brendan, and we've come up with a new concept called the wealth movement, and I think really, it's something that we want to embrace and we want to drive forward, and we will be launching it in the near future. But ultimately, it's actually creating wealth for all, and really what you're talking about is exactly that. It's about communicating, it's about educating, it's about engaging, and most importantly, it's about empowering, so that we can create wealth for all. And I think, a lot of Tony Robbins has come out with a fantastic book at the moment where he talks about, they keep talking about taxing the super wealthy in America, and he actually said that if they murder every wealthy person in America and they steal all their money and take all the money out of business, the money will not last for 1 year in terms of what the government's spending, which is alluding back to what Darby's saying, where government is spending more than what they're earning. And his kind of comment was, well, what would you do after the end of the year? Because now you've lost all the wealthy people and all the businesses that were producing, and what next? And really that's kind of the framework. So it's not about necessarily just bashing government, but it's also about coming up with solutions. And we believe that, with the likes of something like the wealth movement plus plenty others, there certainly are solutions out there. I really want to thank you, Neil, for your perspective, and I look forward to engaging with you and everyone online tonight to take that forward. I wanted to share with you a little bit, all the viewers that are out there, just very quickly, a lot of people talk about the risks, and we've spoken about a major risk tonight. There's even risks out there in private, and we all know this good man that stole $1.5 billion from South Africans. But I think most people are really wanting to focus on wealth preservation. When you talk about property rights and the impact that it has on property rights, wealth preservation is so important. And I just wanted to share with people, and I thought it was pretty pertinent based on what everyone said tonight, but really what has been happening and the tsunami of change that is taking place. And in simple terms, there's three things that are taking place. Firstly, the transformative power of technology. I mean, when you look at what the internet has done to retailing and the likes of Amazon, it is absolutely massive. That is colliding with the adoption of technology. They believe that by 2016, there'll be 1 billion handsets on the continent of Africa. Now, when people understand how important that actually is, you know, literacy is there's 1 billion people that don't have literacy. And yet, by 2016, there's going to be 1 billion handsets. There's a Global Learning X Prize at the moment, which is actually being crowdfunded through Indiegogo, where they plan to reach 1.6. They need a further 1.6 million teachers. But through this exercise, children are going to be able to teach themselves through using a tablet. And when you consider how massive that is going to be and the impact that that is going to have on the planet, and after literacy and education, ultimately comes the value of wealth and wealth creation and ultimately wealth preservation. And the third part is the regulatory change, and things are really, really changing. And what it's ultimately coming back to is this concept of crowdfunding. People having access now to the best information, best opportunities around the world. And really the challenge for governments around the world is to engage, but as I've mentioned already, the flights of private capital, it's now being completely democratized. And whether it's 1 rand, $1, 1 pound, 1 euro, or 1 yen, it's irrelevant. People will put it wherever they're going to get the best return or the best safety, and their rights will be protected. You know, Davy alluded to it, but, you know, currencies as they are today, which has been one of the best ways of controlling people for the last 20 centuries, are changing and are changing fast. And crowdfunding is going to have a massive impact. But when people try and understand what it's all about, it's no different to a stokvel. You know, the 80,000 stokvels in South Africa, $1.2 billion is under management through stokvels or synagogues, as we understand them. And ultimately, they're ancient traditions that are now just being empowered with technology. You know, for people that are more savvy, there's 3 things that come about when one thinks about a stokvel. The first one is trust. And, you know, when one takes into account eBay and what you get on eBay and the social proofing, I mean, when you look at this, you don't have to know this buyer or seller, but they've done it 974 times. You know that you can trust them. So the first thing is trust. The second thing is transparency. You know, most people don't get the transparency. I think, you know, Pete alluded to it tonight. You've got to have so much in-depth time, knowledge, and resources to go and look at everything that's changing. And people like Neil and Pete are out there trying to empower us as the individuals to understand what is happening. And whether it's our individual investments or whether it's our collective rights as individuals within a society, we want that transparency. And most importantly, we want our interests aligned. You know, a lot of the questions that have been asked tonight and a lot of the concerns I have is that when it comes to government, our interests are not aligned. You know, I want certain interests, certain people want other interests, and when their interests are not aligned, then ultimately you're not going to have that sustainability. And so whether you're looking at an individual investment or whether you're looking at the agricultural policy of South Africa, we've got to have the interests aligned. If we all had 100% confidence that the government policy was there to empower the individual and not to enrich the politician, you know, I think it would certainly change a huge amount. I had a really, really interesting experience just last week in Singapore, where a Singapore taxi driver said, you can trust the government no matter what they do, it's in the interest of the people. Well, I certainly do not have that same feeling at home, and I can guarantee you there are tens of millions of people that feel the same way. And so when one looks at it at an investment level, this is the old model, and whether it's purely investment or whether it's government policy, it's the same thing. There's not much trust, there's not much transparency, there's a lot of money being wasted at every different level, and this is that economic leakage. And this is why, when you look at what Darby's talking about, why there literally is so much expenditure around the world and why things need to change. And yet with the digital phenomenon that is taking place, people now have access to opportunities, they have access to wealth creation through marketplaces with complete trust, transparency, and their interests being aligned. I'm not going to go into this because we've run over time hugely. Things are changing dramatically. This industry is going to be worth $96 billion in the next 10 years. And in simple terms, how do we do it and what is exciting me? Well, the bottom line is that through your gadget, through your cell phone or your iPad, you now have access to the best information and the best partners globally. If you want to, we will send a copy out of our book, The Global Property System. It can show you all the different countries around the world. It gives you a statistical analysis, a 4-dimensional model, so that you're not using gut feels as to where to invest. Should you be investing in South Africa with high return, high risk, or should you be looking at the USA or Australia or Cyprus? as to where you ultimately should be investing. And then finally, in terms of what we do, what makes us different, well, the bottom line is it's our experience. You know, our clients have trusted us with $1.34 billion US over the last 3 decades. We've invested on 5 different continents. We've got the compliance. We call ourselves locally legal, but acting globally. And I think really what is beautiful is that we set up your global real estate marketplace, your trusted global real estate marketplace, which ultimately allows you, if you've got as little as $10,000, if you'd like to sit down with any one of our team, just write down their meeting, just type in meeting, and we can sit with you over the next couple of weeks where we will show you how with as little as $10,000, you now can actually invest with the best partners and the best opportunities, whether they're in South Africa or whether they're internationally, whether they're in New York, in Sydney, in Brisbane, in London, whether it's medical portfolios. You know, we just bought this $16 million investment with cap rates of 8.5% and 100% occupancy with government leases, or whether it's assisted living in Australia, or to be honest, whether it's 10 hospitals in South Africa. So there's plenty of different opportunities for people that want to look. But I think in simple terms, I wanted to finish off with a statement. And ultimately, you know, Neil, if you're still online, I think that this is the most important statement that I've read in a long time. And I think really it's the statement that we need to go forward with for money and to government. And Abraham Lincoln said it many, many years ago. He said, let not him who is houseless pull down the house of another, but let him work diligently and build one for himself, thus by example assuring that his own shall be free from violence when built. And, you know, I'm not sure if any of you are online, but that really, for me, symbolizes what it is we're talking about. Because we can try and disempower, we can try and take from others, or we can engage, we can embrace, and most importantly, we can empower. And ultimately, then everyone will win. And I think Abraham Lincoln summed it up perfectly. And when government tries to turn around and say, how is it possible? Well, it is possible through the likes of crowdfunding. Because through the likes of crowdfunding, it can empower the individual to create wealth, which is why we are so excited and so empowered by ultimately the wealth movement and what is happening. You know, are any of you online? And I'd like just you to give your thoughts on what Abraham Lincoln says and how powerful this actually is. Okay, I'm going to move on then. So in conclusion, I think really for those of you who want to understand how important this is, you really have 3 options. Government legislation and things are changing. You can sit back and like a tsunami, it'll come in and it will ultimately be a tsunami of destruction. You can sit on the beach, you know, after tonight and what Peter shared, you cannot be naive to what is happening. You need to understand what is happening. And just like this person on the beach here, it's too late by the time the wave is that close. Or ultimately, you can get the information with our beautiful Table Mountain. You can be out at backline. If you want to surf and there's a big wave coming, you need to be prepared. You need to have the faith to go out to backline to ride that wave. But you can ultimately take the third one, which is you can understand these challenges, you can understand these changes. You can ride this wave of change. You can have an awesome experience in riding this wave of change. And most importantly, you can be empowered. You can create your own wealth through this process. You do not need to be disenfranchised and stuck in the current reality, because things are changing. There's a huge amount changing, and now you have the power to be able to access the opportunity both locally and globally. And so, you know, I wanted to share with you our vision is to be tomorrow's simple answer for like-minded property investors to create wealth today. And there's our website, wealthmigrate.com. There's our book. We will be sharing it. For those of you who don't know, go to propertygoingglobal.com and you will be able to get access to it. And I think really one of the things that I think is so important is that ultimately we all are there, and it is all of our responsibility to find solutions. And Renee Deschamps said here, you know, speaks, you know, of the whole give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, or teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. And, you know, I think that's a biblical way of discussing what Abraham Lincoln said. But most importantly, I just challenge individuals, I challenge governments both in South Africa and around the world. If we empower the individual, if we educate the individual, if you look at things like the Global X Prize, Global Literacy X Prize, where $10 million US dollars is going to be awarded to any company that can provide literacy to the nearly 1 billion people around the world that are illiterate, of which 2/3 of them are women. You have 250 million children, and we can embrace technology and we can provide literacy. And what else can we do in terms of wealth? And when one considers the impact that crowdfunding is having all over the world, I think that that is where the solution lies. And if government is open-minded, I believe that it will be able to embrace it, just like in Malaysia, where they're dropping all restrictions. And ultimately, Malaysians will have access to the best opportunities, the best partners to be able to create their wealth. And that really is what the wealth movement is all about. It is creating wealth for all through real estate. We're passionate about it. We believe that it is perfectly possible. And we believe that that is the answer and that is where it lies. And so I want to thank everyone that's been online tonight, to Hilda and Neil, to Pete and Darby and Vuyani. It's so great to have so many of you online. I apologize that we've gone over quite dramatically, but really to get all your perspectives was fantastic. It opened up tremendous debate, and as I feel, we could have gone on for many, many, many hours, if not days. But I leave you with one perspective that you need to think about. The bottom line is we can bury our head in the sand and we can do nothing about this. Or we can embrace the future, we can look for solutions, and we can continue to live in a fantastic country where everyone is empowered and enabled to access the vast resources and wealth that our country offers. But I challenge government and I challenge the individual to get their interests aligned, to get a common direction, to get clarity on what the future is. Because once you know where the top of the mountain is, then you can aim for it collectively and you can get there. I truly hope for my children, for my future generations, for our wonderful country, and most importantly, for everyone that is part of this country, that we can make that happen. So thank you to all of you tonight. Let's do what it takes to empower South Africa and make it happen. And let's get behind the wealth movement so that not only you can benefit, but you can help others benefit, not only in South Africa, but on the continent of Africa and globally. The choice is yours. What you do with the night and what you do with it going forward, it is yours to go forward. Please share this with others. Only by helping others understand what it is that is going on at the moment will we be able to get the results we need. Thank you to all of you tonight. I think that is all the questions that have come through. It's been a pleasure. It is literally 3 a.m. here in Indonesia, which is where I've been running this webinar from. And the last thing I would like to thank is to Robin and Michiel and the rest of the team, Lawrence, that have been invaluable in putting this together tonight. As always, you guys are wonderful, and without you, we wouldn't have been able to share this. So thank you to everyone. It is going on 9 o'clock in South Africa, 3 a.m. my time. Hopefully tonight has been valuable. Please give us feedback. We look forward to your comments. Thank you very much. Good night.